In 1 moment, we will be on. You'll get a little thing that says it's being live streamed.
Yes.
Okay.
And Jim, can you push the camera down because there's such a glare on the screen behind you from the window or the light. I guess it's the light fixture.
You know, it's the wrong camera. That's why.
There we go. That's a better camera. Okay. So our topic today is sustainable eating. Do we still need a couple minutes or?
No, I think you can reintroduce yourself.
Okay.
That'd be great.
Sure. So I will reintroduce myself. Hi, everyone. I'm Heidi Roth. I'm a registered dietitian and health coach. So I've been to CCB several times before in person. In the last, year or so, we've been doing this over Zoom, and it's worked out well. So nice to see all of you. What we're going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, if that's okay, Rabbi Jim. And
good to go, God willing.
So I'm going to share my screen, and what I need, if everyone can mute themselves now, what I'll do is at the end, you can all unmute yourselves, but that is very helpful for that we don't get any background noise. Sometimes it's hard to hear.
And Heidi, I'm going to make you a co-host. So if we end up with extra noise, you as well as I be the squelcher of background noise.
That sounds good. All right, I see. So I'm going to mute everyone. There we go. Perfect. And at the end, I'll unmute everyone, and then you'll have a chance to ask questions, and we can have a bit of a discussion. So, and don't forget, while I'm talking, please feel free to use your chat box. It's, you can find it up at the top, where you find the mute button and your record button. So feel free to use the chat box if you have any questions while I'm talking. But otherwise, we'll also have time for discussion at the end. So let's get started. So what is sustainable eating? Raise your hand if you've heard this term before, kind of being passed around. And are you familiar? Okay, I'm seeing a couple hands being raised. You've probably heard it before because you're here and you're probably wondering like, well, what does that exactly mean? Well, so we start with sustainable. What does sustainable mean? Something that's able to be maintained at a certain rate or level, something that's being able to be upheld or defendable, right? Something that we can continue on doing. And it's been said with the current way we're doing our eating systems now, it's not sustainable. We can't continue this, 50 years into the future. So how do we kind of go about changing our food systems so that they are more sustainable? So what does that all encompass? Honestly, there's really no official definition of what sustainable eating is, right? We have the official Webster definition of what sustainable means, but not really when it applies to sustainable eating. But generally, everyone agrees sustainable eating is about choosing foods that are healthful to the environment and to our bodies. So if it's just good for the environment, that's not really sustainable eating because we want something that's going to nourish us as well. So, and it's totally possible to do both good for the environment and good for ourselves. But we also want it to be humane for the workers. We want it to be humane for animals. We want it to promote fair wages and improve the community where this food production is taking place. So probably, when we think about sustainable eating, we typically think about what is the carbon footprint of what you eat. And so, people always talk about, the carbon footprint. And that is probably, in general, when we talk about sustainable eating, that's what typically we've always looked at, right? So when you look at the carbon footprint, what do you see as the biggest producer of carbon emissions? Of course, is beef. So beef production, the way that it's typically done now in these large feedlot operations, is not necessarily, we know it uses so much water, so much energy to produce. Cows, they don't produce a lot of offspring. They eat a lot of the way that they're raised now. You have to spend all this time growing food for them to eat, and then they eat it, and you don't get that much in return from how much food the cow actually produces, right? And so that's why when we talk about the carbon footprint of beef, it's so bad. But we have to remember that there's a lot of other things that go into food production as well. When we talk about, what's sustainable, it's not just the greenhouse gas emissions. It's also, like we talked about, is it humane? How are the workers treated? How many pesticides and toxins are released into the environment? So in other words, we go down here to tomatoes or beans or, tofu, but then we also have to ask, are these being grown as a monocrop? So, sustainable food eating is a lot more than just what the carbon footprint is. There's a lot of kind of complex issues that are involved. And no one really has all the answers yet, right? So the other interesting thing is that there was a new study published in 2018, and it was a review of 570 studies published over the last 20 years. And in this case, they took into the impact of land use, freshwater use. So when we talk about water use, we also have to think about, maybe foods are grown in an area that maybe don't use that much water. Are they grown in an area where water is not available that much, right? And so even though they may not use that much water, how much are they using in comparison to how much water is available? So for example, almonds use a ton of water. And where are almonds grown? They're not typically grown in areas that have a lot of water. They're grown, for example, in California. California is experiencing record droughts. So, to some extent, we're being told, well, change over from dairy to plant-based milk, drink almond milk, but we also have to take into consideration that impact of, how much water are almonds using, and are they grown in a drought area, for example, right? How much are these things polluting the water, the air? And so the way foods are grown can have a huge difference, and they're produced. For example, they found rice fields are typically flooded with water. And then that water then drains off into the ecosystem and into the water system. And they found that farmers can drain their fields in different ways. And they can drain it in a way and kind of flood the rice fields in ways that don't really use all that much water. And then there's less runoff. So the way that you grow rice can have a huge impact. Things like tomatoes, are you growing them in a greenhouse and hydroponically? Huge difference from maybe just a huge conventional field of regular tomatoes. And so the same food can have a much different impact and be, way different places on that scale of whether it's sustainable or not. And probably, of course, then the biggest impact is beef. We had talked about that beef produces a huge amount of greenhouse emissions. And high impact beef has 12 times the emissions and 50 times the land use of sustainably raised beef. So the way you raise those cows can make a huge difference. And in fact, there are some ways that you can raise cows called regenerative farming, where you're actually sequestering carbon back into the soil. So how you raise these cows makes makes a huge difference. So it's, you know, there are some complex issues. Here we talked about the almond farms before. Soy is a big part of the plant-based diet. But typically, how is soy grown? It's grown in these huge industrial farms that are monocropped, and that's all they grow on. All they grow is soy. And a lot of, you know, farmers and, you know, scientists are saying, hey, they're kind of depleting the soil. When you only grow one monocrop, you do deplete the soil. So a lot of different issues to consider, right? The other issue to consider is how far does your food need to travel, right? You know, typically when we talk about clean eating and healthy eating, we talk about avocados, eat lots of avocados. They're a great type of fat. But then we also need to consider how far are those avocados traveling to where we are, right? And, you know, most of us don't have avocado trees in our backyard because you can't grow them here, obviously, in this climate. So it is a little more complex than just how many greenhouse gases these plants are emitting in food production, right? But when we talk about what are the things that we can do, I apologize. I kind of got my slides out of order here, but that's okay. We're going to deal with it. What can we do? So we're going to talk about 8 different things. We're going to talk about, number 1, eating more plants, cutting down on our consumption of animal foods. We're going to talk about reducing processed foods, producing less waste, sustainable seafood. So those are all some of the things that we're going to talk about. So let's start with eating more plants. Typically, if you Google, you know, sustainable eating, how do I eat more sustainably? The number 1 thing that comes up is eat more plants, eat less meat. Now, you know, many people are proponents of a vegan diet, a 100% plant-based diet, and yes, it has a lot of benefits to it. But I do have to say, absolutely, I do not recommend it for seniors. I don't recommend it for children and pregnant women. Why? Because seniors, you really, as you grow older, your requirements for protein actually go up a little bit, high quality protein. And one of the biggest risks to seniors is the loss of muscle mass, which results in frailty and more falls and, you know, less being able to do your activities of daily living. So making sure that as a senior, you get enough protein is vitally important. You need, you know, certain nutrients that are sometimes deficient in vegan diets, right? B12, some of the B vitamins, different B vitamins. What else? Iron, right? And so that is why for seniors, it's great to eat lots of plants, you know, maybe cut down on your total consumption of beef. But let me just say for seniors, I really don't recommend going all the way over to a 100% plant-based or vegan diet. But, you know, you can certainly adopt a little bit more plant-based, right? So what are the typical plant-based diets? We have things like the Mediterranean diet, probably is one of the most well-studied diets, especially for decreasing inflammation, decreasing heart disease. We know that thing like the traditional Asian diet is a very healthy diet. And then the flexitarian diet. What is a flexitarian diet? That means that some days you might eat meat, some days you don't, but you overall try to eat a very healthy diet. You know, when we talked about eating maybe a little bit more plants, you know, things like whole grains, fruits and veggies, starchy vegetables at the center of your plate. Things like making sure that you're eating lots of tasty foods that are delicious, but that maybe do contain a little bit less beef, right? Veggie chili, or maybe you can also use some chicken, whole grain pasta, tacos, stir fries. So with a whole foods kind of plant-centered diet, you eat lots of vegetables, fruits, beans, whole grains, nuts and seeds, herbs and spices, and you eat less animal foods. It doesn't mean that you have to cut them out completely, but maybe less beef, and specifically less refined sugar, less refined flour, oils, margarines, those types of things. And you can find lots of plant-based recipes, online, things like the Minimalist Baker, Forks Over Knives, Sprouted Kitchen. These are all great places to get some more kind of plant-based types of recipes. The other thing that you can do is to maybe every once in a while you have what's called a Meatless Monday. So maybe once a week you just have a vegetarian meal instead of a meal that's kind of typically, as Americans, we always think when we're having for dinner, what meat am I going to have, right? Where's the beef? And so this kind of changed the concept of maybe one day a week you go vegetarian and you do go meatless. And there's lots of ways to be healthy vegetarian. So as a senior, if you want to be a 100% vegetarian and you're including eggs and dairy, 100% A-okay, right? You don't necessarily need meat, but it is nice to include some form of animal foods in the form of either, yogurt or milk or cheese or eggs. You can make the meat the flavoring of dinner, not necessarily the star. Anyone familiar with the book VB6? VB6 is written by, I'm seeing a thumbs up here. It's written by an author, Mark Bittman. He's written a lot of cookbooks. And Mark Bittman was also the food reviewer for the New York Times, I believe it was. And he realized like, hey, I would do better to eat more plants, maybe a little bit less meat. And, but he said, as a food reviewer, how am I going to go to restaurants and eat out and review the meals if I can't eat any meat? And so he decided to be VB6, vegan before 6 o'clock. So in the morning and through the day, maybe he eats 100% plant-based and then he eats meat for dinner. So it's not all or nothing. And once again, as a senior, if you wanted to be 100% vegetarian, 100% okay. You are getting some more of that really high quality protein that you're getting from the eggs and milk and dairy products. Okay, so also when we talk about eating maybe more plants, one of the plants that we all should be consuming more of is leafy greens. Leafy greens are some of the healthiest plants on the diet. For anybody, raise your hand. I can't see everybody, but did anyone attend any of my brain seminars on eating to prevent dementia and eating for your healthy brain? I'm not, from the people who I can see, I'm seeing, okay, one thumbs up. Yeah. So one of the things that we always talk about when we talk about a diet that's healthy brain is leafy greens. And leafy greens are kind of the foundation of eating lots of plants. They're inexpensive, they're easy to cook, easy to eat, they're delicious, and they provide so many nutrients. So maybe you cut up some greens and you put them in an omelet, you make yourself a green smoothie, stir fry some spinach or kale. I like to buy the big clam boxes of spinach, of the organic spinach. And I always kind of have it in my fridge as a staple. And then I can saute it just as a side dish. I can add it into soups and stews and stir fries. And, when we talk about some of the healthiest foods to eat, greens definitely are way high up there on the list. And then the other thing, when we talk about maybe eating a little bit more plant-based, is beans. Beans, as dietitians, when people ask us, what are some of the healthiest things to eat? We say beans and greens, beans and greens, beans and greens, right? It's kind of easy to remember. Beans are some of the best bang for your buck in terms of price, right? They're inexpensive. They're high in protein. They're really amazing for your gut microbiome. So whether you cook them yourself or you get them canned is 100% okay too. Adding beans into kind of more of a staple of your diet. If you're cooking them yourself, if you have an instant pot, you don't need to soak them. Typically with beans, you do need to soak them to soften them up a little bit. Lentils are also really nice because lentils cook fairly quickly and also don't need to be soaked. So adding some more beans into your diet is a really very sustainable way to eat. Okay, so when we talk about sustainable eating, one of the questions that always comes up is, should I eat organic? And there's a lot of benefits to eating organic, right? With organic fruits and vegetables, you do get some more of that crop rotation going on because you have to pay a little bit more attention to the health of your soil when you're growing organically, because you can't use artificial fertilizers. So organic farmers typically will do a lot more crop rotation, and then the soil's healthier. Maybe they might use animal manure or compost to fertilize, use things like mechanical weeding, biological pest control. And so this all kind of feeds into that sustainable eating because you're being stewards of the environment and you're not contaminating the environment with all these pesticides as much when you're eating organic. So that is one thing to consider with organic. Buying, the nice thing is that the price of organic foods has really kind of come down a little bit. And so they aren't so crazy expensive compared to regular foods. So if you can afford organic foods, eating a little bit more organically is a good thing. Here they don't use, the artificial fertilizers, antibiotics for animals, and all of that. Now, when we talk about organic versus sustainable, there are still some differences, right? Sustainable farms are usually smaller. They're tend to be locally owned, potentially better for the community, right? It's not this huge mono farm. It tends to be smaller family-owned farms that when you are, a sustainable type of farm, you're trying to conserve water, you're trying to conserve energy. Perhaps you're using more eco-friendly food packaging. But keeping in mind that organic is a government label, right? To have that seal of USDA organic, you have to follow certain standards. But there is no official stamp that you can put on your food that says this is sustainable. It's a fairly new concept, in the food industry, I would say, especially over the last maybe 10, 15 years. And then lastly, I talked a lot about, eating a little bit more plant-based, eating less meat. However, we have to keep in mind that when we talk about sustainability, that part of that is nutrition, right? And for certain populations, especially, meat can be very, very nutritious and provide this amazingly dense source of B vitamins and B12 and iron, in a relatively small portion. So if we're eating meat, and when we do, looking for sustainably raised meat. We're lucky that we live here in the Boston area, and there's a company here called Walden Local. And they're a certified B Corporation, which means that they're keeping, they're doing things where they're treating their workers correct, they're treating the environment correct, and they're also treating the animals correctly. So these animals are all sustainably raised, humanely treated on local farms here in the New England area. I don't know, raise your hand. Is anyone familiar with Walden Farms? Okay, I'm seeing one hand go up there. So that is, if you can get a small little share that comes, you can get it once a quarter. So, 4 times a year, and everything is frozen. So they'll deliver it right to your door. Everything is frozen, and you're doing something that's good for the environment and also good for local farmers that are trying to do the right thing. You know, there's plenty of books and plenty of documentaries that will talk all about the benefits of eating a vegan plant-based diet that are really, really wonderful, wonderful books. There's not a lot of books out there that talk about how to raise meat in a regenerative, sustainable way. And this is a book that came out, I think, 2 years ago. It's a very thoughtful, well-written book that talks about some of the benefits to the environment of raising animals in a regenerative way. You know, typically 99% of beef that's raised and most animals are not raised humanely and are not good for the environment. But in those small family farms that, you know, that we looked about here, you know, when it's raised local in a regenerative way, it can actually be very good for the environment and help with the health of the soil and actually helping to sequester some carbon. So it's really interesting. So if you're looking for a book to read and you're, you know, interested in this type of stuff, I would highly, highly recommend a book called Sacred Cow. And it's why well-raised meat is good for human nutrition, good for the planet, right? There's not a lot of books that get 5-star ratings on Amazon. This book has a 5-star rating. Over 1,000 people gave it a 5-star rating. So that's kind of crazy. It's a really very interesting, well-written book. You know, that's very extremely well researched. I thought this was an interesting comment that somebody had written here. Everybody wants the same thing: to maximize human nutrition while minimize animal suffering and harm to the environment, right? That's at the goal of eating sustainably. And the Sacred Cow describes the best way to achieve these goals. So when you're looking for a book on sustainable eating, this definitely, I would say, would be, you know, one of the books to add into your library. Okay, number 2 is to reduce or eliminate ultra-processed foods. So food takes a lot of energy, you know, to process it, to ship it, to grow it, right? In so many different ways. And when we're eating this ultra-processed food, we're taking a lot of energy that's used to create this food, but unfortunately, it's not giving us the nutrition. So when we talk about bang for our buck in terms of harm to the environment, which is high, and then nutrition is low, that's really one of the main reasons, for many other reasons, why we really want to kind of reduce or eliminate that ultra-processed kind of pre-packaged foods as much as possible. You know, if you'll remember that you attended my brain diet, the acronym for that standard American diet, which is really high in that ultra processed food, is SAD, right? For the standard American diet. So it's actually a really good kind of acronym. So whatever we can do to kind of reduce or eliminate that ultra processed food is going to go a long way in terms of helping the environment. And then number 3 is to be picky about the type of seafood that we eat. So seafood can potentially have a big impact on the environment, right? Many of our oceans are getting overfished and our oceans are getting polluted. The organic farms are, the seafood farms many times can pollute the waters and the environment. And then you get fish that maybe are escaping from these farms and getting into an environment where they're not normally found. So being picky about the type of seafood, one of the things to consider is mussels. So mussels are this incredibly sustainable food. They actually help to clean the water that they're in. Now they need to be grown in, they can't be grown in polluted water for eating purposes, right? But when they are grown in polluted water, they actually help to clear some of that polluted water out. But when they're grown in, non-polluted water, they are incredibly healthy. And they also help to mitigate what's called that nutrient pollution. pollution. So a lot of the concerns with all these big factory farms and all these fertilizers from these huge monocrop farms is that they're releasing all this nitrogen into the water. And then what happens when you get all this nitrogen in the water, you end up with what's called a dead zone. And mussels, because they filter the water to get their food. And that's how they get like the little plankton and their food. And in that filtering of the water, it helps to kind of filter out all that excessive nitrogen that's in the water. So they're actually good for the environment. They also can potentially help remove carbon dioxide from the water to grow their shells, and they put it in their shells. So they actually help to, potentially sequester some of that carbon. I just found out today, mussels are actually very long lived. They live they potentially can live 50 to 100 years. They're very easy to grow. And farmed mussels, when we talk about farmed seafood, there's zero input. So they don't use any fertilizers. You don't need fertilizers for them, and you don't need to feed them. And the way they grow them is actually really interesting. What they do is they put these ropes or these chains into the ocean, and then the mussels will attach themselves onto it, right? They like to attach themselves onto hard surfaces, and they're really amazing the way that they can attach themselves. They can attach to rocks, they can attach to wood, they can even attach to steel. So researchers are actually, doing research on them to see how they all attach. But mussels, and in addition, any shellfish, really, right? So whether we're talking about clams or oysters, they're really this amazing source of B12, of the minerals zinc and selenium. So really this nutrient dense food. Okay. I'm seeing someone here put in the chat box, look into organictora.org for organic and eco-friendly kosher eating. So that's a great resource. Thank you for listing that. I am not familiar with that one. I'm gonna have to write that down and look that up. The other place for a good place to go to is the Monterey Bay Seafood Watch. There's an app that you can put on your phone. And what they do is they look at what are the best choices for the environment in terms of sustainability, and also food choices that aren't going to be that polluted, right? Because we worry with seafood sometimes that we might be getting extra mercury. And I was actually surprised, based on the Monterey Food Watch, that they had put a lot of farmed seafood on there. Many times we think of like, oh, farmed seafood might be bad because they're polluting the environment. But really, a lot of the US farms are good choices environmentally. However, you want to stay away from some of the farms that for things like salmon. You want to get that only the New Zealand, the salmon that's farmed in New Zealand. Well, most of us can't get salmon from New Zealand. So, maybe the second best alternative would be Maine farmed in the Atlantic or in California and Washington. But, things like, crab, if it's coming from Alaska, tilapia, I was surprised to see made one of the best choices, because tilapia from China can definitely harm the environment. So here is that's on the avoid list. But so, many times you want to look to see where your food is coming from. And this is a handy little app that you can put on your phone as well. Okay. So number 4 would be to buy local as much as possible, right? So we're kind of past the farmers market season, or getting close to it. We still have farmers markets by us, but I think at the end of October, they're kind of over, right? So if you can get to a farmer's market, I've been told that there's one right down the street, right? Down by Trader Joe's, I guess, or fairly close. So that's kind of one of the best options, looking for signs in stores that say local. And when we buy local, what you're doing is you're getting fresh food that's in season, that also you haven't had all these greenhouse gas emissions, because they've had to travel so far. Okay, thank you. I'm seeing here it's closer to 100 Center, just down the street towards Beacon. So that's amazingly close. And is that still once a week probably until the end of October? Yes. Okay. So when you also go to a farmer's market, you're better able to buy in season. And even when you're going to the grocery store, a lot of times you'll see kind of signs that say, oh, local, or, knowing what's in season is good to know as well. So what's in season now? Apples and pears, now if we live in New England, right? Kind of one of the epicenters of apple picking and apple growing. Cranberries, also a Massachusetts thing. That's going to be in season pretty soon. So typically in the fall, a lot of the cruciferous vegetables, so cabbage, kale, broccoli, broccoli rabe, Brussels sprouts, these are all things that are definitely in season, and even a little bit past October, because kale and a lot of the cruciferous vegetables, you can still pick after the frost. And in fact, they might be even a little sweeter and a little bit better after the frost. So that's some of the benefits of some of those cruciferous types of vegetables. But now we're getting into turnip season and parsnips and a lot of those root vegetables, as well as a lot of the winter squashes. Our farm stand near us, they still have zucchini, green beans, eggplants, peppers, tomatoes. So these, even though it's October and we typically think of these things as summer, they're still all, picking them off the plant and still growing. So it's really kind of a great harvest season right now. Sweet corn is actually over. That doesn't go so much into October, but a lot of these other things do. So number 6 would be to reduce food waste. We've talked about the way that food production has such a high environmental impact. It's been said estimates are about 1/3 of the food produced in the world ends up in a landfill. That's shocking, isn't it? Right? When you think about all the people that are maybe food insecure and are going hungry. And this happens for various reasons. A lot of times it happens right in the farmer's field. Perhaps there might not be buyers for the food, or food might be damaged or imperfect in some way, right? Supermarkets throw out so much food that might be getting a little bit old, that's still good, but they might be impacted in some way. So it's not just, the food that we're throwing out when we get it into our houses. A lot of it happens at the farm level and at the production and distribution level, but we can also do our own, help out in our own way, right? And we can contribute in our own little way. We know that when we waste food, we waste all the energy and water that it takes to grow, harvest, transport, and package it. Not only that, but then when it goes to the landfill, it rots and produces methane, which is a greenhouse gas. That's even worse than carbon dioxide. So, for many, many reasons, we want to try as much as possible and reduce food waste. So what are some tips for reducing food waste? Number 1 is to think differently about leftovers. So many times we have leftovers, and a lot of people maybe don't like leftovers, or, oh, it's leftover, it might be kind of old, or I don't feel like it anymore. And I get it. Many times you don't want to have more than something 1 or 2 days in a row. But if you have a little room in your freezer, one of the things that I like to do is I just make these little lunchtime containers of my meal, and I throw it in the freezer, and then I pull it out, pop it in the microwave, and it's a perfect little lunch. Or dinner, right? If you go to the frozen food section, you see all these dinners in the frozen food section that are all packaged in, you know, the plastic packaging and all that. And you can make your own little frozen food dinner with the leftovers that you have, right? And just put it in a little glass Tupperware container, throw it in the freezer, and then pop it in the microwave, and you have your own little kind of meal all set and ready to go. Some things freeze better than others, and so you can do a little bit of experimentation on your own, what freezes well, what doesn't. But you know, I find that to be helpful. The other thing is to maybe store things a little bit smarter. So for example, putting things in those glass containers that I had mentioned with the plastic lids. And what you can do then is that when you open your fridge, you see all the leftovers that are there. They're not kind of hidden in this opaque container. With salad greens, I like to wash them when I get them home. I spin them dry, and then I put them in a Ziploc bag. And they last, you know, 2 weeks that way, sometimes 2 weeks or longer. So they last, you know, a little bit longer. If you have some leftover greens or leftover veggies or kind of scraps here and there, you can make a soup, put them into a casserole. So every once in a while, I kind of pull everything out of my fridge and I look and see what I have. And I say, okay, what kind of soup can I make? You know, kind of this kind of kitchen sink type of soup is a really great and delicious way to get rid of a lot of those vegetables that are maybe, you know, a little bit less than perfect anymore. So that's a great thing to do. And then the other thing is maybe you take your leftovers and just fry an egg and put an egg on top of it, and it kind of dresses it up into a whole new meal. So that's kind of a really big kind of culinary trend right now, is to top everything with an egg, a fried egg, whether it's a hamburger or ramen noodles or whatever it might be. But it kind of does dress up your leftovers a little bit and makes them into a new meal. Then there's just some tips for expiration date. You know, milk, keep your milk cold, don't leave it out on the counter. So and it really is good for 5 to 7 days past the sell by date. If milk goes a little bit sour, don't forget, you can use it for pancakes. You can use it for any type of baked good, and it has a little bit more of the lactic acid in it. But that's, you know, that's what gives a lot of those baked goods the rise and the yummy taste. Canned foods last up to 5 years. Eggs have a surprisingly long shelf life, and so properly handled, they're still good for 5 to 5 weeks after the sell by date, right? So you know, don't just automatically throw food out if it's not good by the sell by date. For leftovers typically will last 2 to 3 days, you know, maybe a little bit longer depending on what type of leftover it is. But, you know, if in doubt, throw it out. You know, food safety is really important for sure, but don't just automatically throw everything out if you haven't used it by the use by or the sell by date. Keeping in mind, sell by dates are put by the manufacturer, just not for food safety, but for food tastiness, right? For to be kind of at its highest peak quality. That's what the sell by dates are for. Okay. Lastly, reduce, reuse, repurpose, you know, using washable cloths instead of paper towels. Cutting down or eliminating plastic cups and utensils, buying less prepackaged foods. Maybe you store your leftovers in the glass containers that you've saved from peanut butter or from pasta. When you have a peanut butter dish, you know, a lot of times what I like to do is to make a peanut butter dressing for like a noodle salad or a spinach salad. And I just put a little soy sauce in, a little bit of olive oil, maybe a tiny bit of honey, and I shake my peanut butter jar. And then I get the last little bit of peanut butter out, and you know, you pour it on top, or maybe you add some hot water to it, or some boiling water, shake it, and then you stir it into your oatmeal. So, you know, just trying to as much as possible eliminate food waste, reuse those types of containers. So thank you so much, everyone. I am going to stop the share now. And Okay, yeah, there we go. And open it up to questions, comments. We've got about 10 plus minutes or so for questions. If you wanted to unmute yourself, I believe you have the opportunity to unmute yourself. If you wanted to go ahead and ask a question, please go ahead and do that. If you can't unmute yourself, just raise your hand and I'll unmute you for you. Okay, let me unmute you here. Sorry, Georgia, I see you.
Georgia, you have to unmute yourself, unfortunately.
Okay. We can't do it?
No, we can ask to unmute, and then they should have a button and if it pops up on their screen to, if they just push that. There you go, Georgia, perfect.
Okay.
You mentioned the Bittman books. I have one right here. I think his books are wonderful.
Thank you, Beverly.
Oh, they are.
And he has all kinds of scales and weights and things to do in the beginning, like half the book. And it also tells you which season, a lot of what you said, and then he has a lot of additional things.
Oh,
So
yeah, he's a,
to this might be interested in getting one of his books. This is fast cooking, but he has many other books.
I like the fast cooking. I also have one of his that I think is like 5 ingredients or less. And so when you're just looking for like a simple meal, right? It's a great, simple, delicious recipes. Georgia, do you want to hold that back up for us again so we can see it again for anyone else who kind of missed it?
Yeah. This is about 3 years old, I think. But
okay, yeah.
There's one on a couple of pages on how to cut vegetables, like not just avocados, but parsley and all kinds of ways to get, you know, better use out of almost anything. I just think his books are terrific.
Oh, that's awesome. Great. Thank you for sharing.
You're welcome.
You know what? I'm going to put in the chat box. One of the things that I forgot to put in is something called localharvest.org. And they will tell you what the closest farmers market is to you. But if you wanted to do something like a farm share, which can be a nice way, it'll tell you where the closest community supported farm share is to you. So that's kind of a fun little resource as well. So any other questions? Usually you guys have so many questions. Okay, Anne, I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Hey, I don't have any questions, but I just want to say that you've been really inspiring and very informative, and I'm excited about this.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Yeah.
You know, one thing that I forgot to mention too is there's, I live in Arlington, and if you're looking for a charity to support, you know, sometimes we all look for different charities to support. One of the ones that really has been kind of inspiring to me is something called Food Link. I don't know if anyone has ever heard of it, but they just got an award from the Environmental Protection Agency because what they do is they prevent a lot of this food waste, and they prevent all, you know, they try to rescue food before it ends up in the landfill. And then what they do is they have volunteers that pick up the food. You know, let's say there might be a farmer that says, oh, hey, you know, I've got 5,000 pounds of potatoes and, you know, 5,000 is actually a lot, but it's typically not usually that much. But then volunteers will go pick that up, bring it back to Arlington at the food pantry there, and then that's passed out. I'm sorry. What was the question?
I think that was I think that was background noise from someone.
Oh, okay, yeah. So so Food Link is just one of the ones in Arlington. So it's a nice charity to support. If you know, sometimes we look for different charities that might align with our values, and that's kind of a nice one. Now, Rabbi Jim, I saw you put Grow and Behold. I'm not familiar with that one. What is that?
Yeah, I wanted to put that in because we do have some people here who keep kosher, and if you're Walden meat is a great source for meat if you don't need to eat kosher meat, but if you do, If you do want to eat kosher meat, then Grow and Behold, it offers, I don't know, I can't say it's, as local or as sustainable, but it does offer sustainable meat that has been slaughtered according to the rules of kashrut. So if that's important to you, that is a resource. Along with well, I have friends who use Walden. I don't eat non-kosher. I don't eat a lot of meat in general, but my friends really like Walden. They eat a lot of meat, and that definitely satisfies them. So.
Yeah. Oh, cool.
I saw Naomi had wanted to say something.
Yeah, incidentally, people who are in the community room cannot participate interactively with this, which got a little weird.
Oh, sorry about that.
My question is that this seemed to be aimed basically at people who do their own shopping and their own cooking, and even at Trader Joe's and Stop and Shop can have choices about what they buy. But quite a few of us are tied to a corporation called Unidy. And therefore, we do not have the kind of choices that you're discussing. So what kind of influence can we have on corporations like this? For example, we have salmon every Friday, and frankly, I don't know where, I'm not sure where this salmon comes from. I have never seen mussels on a menu. I have seen other shellfish, but how do we operate sustainably in these conditions?
Yeah, and probably mussels. Now that I think about it, you won't see on the menu because if they do keep do they keep kosher?
They don't. They have shrimp.
Oh, they don't. Okay.
They serve meat with milk.
Okay.
And the only don't ask me what I think of it because you don't want to hear me, but the only rule they really keep is that they don't serve pork products.
Yeah.
Okay. They don't serve pork. Okay. So, so that's really, a great point to keep in mind. And so the first thing would be to then talk to the person who's doing the cooking at your own location, right? And ask them, where is that salmon coming from? And if they don't know, kind of going up the food chain and saying, hey, where is this coming from? That it's really difficult in an industrial type of food service, not industrial, but in a big, huge food service operation, it really would be cost prohibitive to serve wild salmon, right? Wild salmon is really the best. But what you can do is you can say, hey, is that salmon, is that being farmed up in, in one of the places that, we know are some of the better places to farm that salmon, or is it coming from China? And typically anything that's, I shouldn't say anything, but most of the things that are farmed in China, you really kind of want to avoid. So, talking to your chef and getting to know your chef, and then asking for particular types of suggestions about what they might do to be more sustainable, right? If you're noticing something on the menu that maybe you're noticing asparagus, in the middle of winter when it's kind of out of season, say, hey, it's nice to have the asparagus, but can we have some more maybe in seasonal types of vegetables? It'll be cheaper for you too. So I guess it would be just really, and it's a big, long discussion because I know there's a lot of frustration when you are, kind of beholden to the food service company that does the cooking for you, right? And I know that there can be a lot of frustrations, and as the chef, I'm sure that they have a lot of constrictions on what they are allowed to do in terms of what their budget is. And so it's difficult. So you kind of, as much as you can, working together with them to say, hey, can we buy some more of our vegetables from, the farmer's market? And I don't know if there's any sort, does anyone have like a little tiny garden or anything, is there any area to grow anything at CCB?
Yeah, we have, actually, I'm looking out over the, where I'm sitting now at 112 Center Street, past the big air filter machines. There's a little gardening area, and people have little garden boxes. And I think that those exist as well at the 1550 Beacon Street.
Okay.
I'm not sure what we've got at 100 Center Street, but there is some opportunities. Some people grow flowers, other people grow vegetables.
So the other thought might be, could there be, for those people that don't have their own kitchens and don't do their own cooking, is there some way that if you did have a garden that you could contribute that somehow to the chef? It would certainly help their food budget, right? And then they would have some fresh food to cook as well. So, maybe
Nice
thinking
idea.
outside of the box in terms of what are some different ways that maybe we could, within the chef's budget that we have here, get some fresher, healthier types of foods. So.
All right.
All right.
Well, thank you so much, Heidi. This is really great.
Thank you.
Very, very helpful. And as Anne said, inspiring, again, to sort of re-engage with some of these issues, especially for me. COVID somehow has meant, even less cooking than before, and more of a reliance on sort of things that are very easy. And so this is an inspiration to get back into the kitchen, back to the farmer's market, so on and so forth. So thank you very much to everyone. So we will be switching now from food and nutrition to sing along and music. So feel free to stick around if you'd like. And thanks again, Heidi.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. So nice to see you all.
Great to see everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.